We're going to move on to item number 5, which is the appeal of 318 South Howard Street conditional use permit. And Becky, are you here? Before you do your presentation, John, I want to let John make a quick announcement here.
Yeah, excuse me, I've got a cold. But I have driven by this property since it's near my house. And so not necessarily to inspect it, but, oh, there it is. That's one thing. And the other is that I got an email from one of our citizens, and I had no idea why I got this email, because this particular process started before I got on the council. And anyway, in reading part of the email, I realized that this was something that was going to come in front of the city council. So at that point, I stopped reading the email, deleted the email, but feel that I should bring forward the fact that there was a small amount of communication unbeknownst to me when I started reading it, and I don't think it'll have any effect on how I vote. And to tell you the truth, if anybody here would prefer I sit down, I would be more than willing. But if you're fine with it, I'm fine with it.
John, I'm going to refer to our attorney, Rod, and city manager, Gary.
He disclosed that he had an email, a communication. He said that he stopped reading it when he kind of realized that it was something that was coming up. I think that was the appropriate thing to do, and he disclosed it, and he said he wouldn't have any, any bias on the matter.
As long as there's no conflict of interest, as long as the council member indicates that he or she can sit and not let it influence their decision, then that's be appropriate.
Okay, thank you. Walter.
I'm in the same position as John. I got an email, quite frankly, I don't remember what position, if any, it took. I just glanced through it and said, we'll look at the matter when it comes. I also have driven by the property. Don't see it's going to inflate.
Yeah, I got the same email and referred the sender over to Bill Belknap for further information.
Well, heck, I'm feeling left out.
I think we've had full disclosure. Evidently,
I didn't get it.
Wayne and Dan didn't read your email, I guess.
Actually,
No,
I
no,
probably
I'm only
just
kidding,
recognized that it was going to be a conflict of interest and probably just
Yeah.
deleted it immediately.
Okay, very good. We'll move on then. Becky, would you like to do the presentation on this, please?
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. Before you tonight is an appeal of a conditional use permit decision for a parcel at 318 South Howard Street. The owner of the subject property made initial contact with the Community Development Department with draft plans for a new accessory structure. The structure was proposed to have a two-car garage with an office space on the ground floor and a two-bedroom living space on the second floor. The applicant initially described the intended use of the living space as a place for family and friends to stay with no mention of the desire to rent the space. The applicant was advised by staff that a kitchen would not be allowed, as this would create a second dwelling on the property. The applicant then pursued a conditional use permit for a guest house. The applicant was issued a building permit for the accessory structure so that he could begin construction on the garage, and the plans indicated storage space on the second floor. During the submission of the conditional use permit application and over discussions with the applicant, I was informed of the applicant's intent to rent the space out to generate extra income. I did not take issue with this information because the definition of a guest house does not specifically prohibit the use of compensation. However, this was a misinterpretation of the code on my part, as historical interpretation of the guest house has been for overnight guest accommodations without compensation. Therefore, the application was brought before the Board of Adjustment, where the property owner proposed to construct and use the second floor of an accessory structure as a guest house. The guest house consisted of 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a living room, a dining, and a great room. The applicant noted on the application that the proposed use would provide a public benefit of lodging. The proposed accessory structure included a double garage for use by the principal structure and 1 parking space to be added to the south of the accessory structure for use by the guests. The Property is located at 318 South Howard Street and highlighted here in red. And here's just a closer look at the property. The subject property is located within the moderate density single-family residential zone R2, where accessory living quarters serving as a guest house or domestic servant quarters are permitted via a conditional use permit. This is the proposed floor plan for the guest house that was submitted by the applicant, and as I indicated earlier, there was 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a living, and a dining/great room. The subject property is a 6,250 square foot parcel with an existing single-family dwelling. The property is accessed via South Howard Street with rear access via the Howard Monroe Alley. Howard Street's a 30-foot wide local residential street with curb, gutter, and sidewalk on both sides, and the alley is 20 feet in width. The majority of adjacent properties are similarly situated with single-family dwellings and garages in the rear accessed via the alley. There are a multifamily use to the south and a duplex on a parcel to the northeast. Properties across Howard Street are in the R4 zone and include the American Legion Cabin and Frontier Communications Building. All other uses are residential in character. Here's some photos of the alley behind the subject property. The proposed structure is actually proposed to be located just to the south of this existing white structure there. This is the subject property here where the tarp is laid, is where the proposed structure is now being built, and this is an existing garage, just to show an existing double car garage that's accessed from the alley. Relating this application to the comprehensive plan, Chapter 2, Land Use and Community Character, designates the subject property as neighborhood conservation. Neighborhood conservation areas are intended to preserve the character of existing residential neighborhoods, and an objective of Chapter 2 is to protect existing neighborhood identity and character by preventing unintended impacts to established neighborhoods with cohesive character and community identity, and utilizing neighborhood conservation designations to protect and promote the existing neighborhood feel. The staff's recommendation to the Board of Adjustment was to conduct the public hearing and consider all testimony presented, and then approve the application for the conditional use permit for a guest house with no conditions. The testimony before the board included the applicant, who stated that his intent was to provide overnight accommodation to non-family member guests for compensation, and it was his understanding from the beginning that this was permitted with a guest house. There was one individual that spoke in favor of the proposal and appreciated that someone was taking interest in property in his area, and there was one individual that objected to the application due to potential increases in traffic through an already heavily traveled alleyway. I'm going to review the relevant criteria and standards that are utilized to base a approval or denial of a conditional use permit. The proposed use will not endanger public health or safety if located where proposed, and will not result in conditions which will generate nuisances, or any potential nuisances will be appropriately mitigated. The proposed use must meet all applicable development standards of the zoning code, including building height, setbacks, parking, use limitation, landscaping, and performance standards. The proposed use must not be injurious or detrimental to adjoining properties or the neighborhood. The proposed use shall be of public necessity and is justified by the applicant and deemed by the board to be of benefit to the public. The character of the proposed use, if developed according to plans submitted, shall be in harmony with the area in which it is to be located. The proposed use must not endanger the public health or safety, and it must be in conflict with the comprehensive plan. The Board of Adjustment denied the application on January 23rd, 2014, based upon the applicant's testimony of the intent to rent the guest house. The board determined the proposed use of a guest house for compensation is not authorized under the definitions of the zoning ordinance. Now I'm going to go over a few relevant definitions from the zoning code that are applicable to this application. First off, a guest house is defined as a detached structure being an accessory to a single-family dwelling with not more than 2 bedrooms, having no kitchen facilities, and which shall be used or designed for use primarily by guests or servants for sleeping quarters only. The zoning code does not provide a definition of a guest, so I've provided three sample definitions from three different sources. From the Oxford Dictionary, a guest is defined as a person invited to visit, have a meal, etc., at the expense of the inviter, or a person lodging at a hotel, boarding house, etc. From the Webster's Dictionary, a guest is defined as the recipient of hospitality at the home or table of another, or one to whom entertainment or hospitality has been extended, or a patron of an establishment such as a restaurant or hotel. And from dictionary.com, a guest is a person who spends some time at another person's home in some social activity, or a person who patronizes a hotel, restaurant, etc. for the lodging, food, or entertainment it provides. Some other definitions from the zoning code that are that provide a lodging type use include a bed and breakfast, which is a building occupied by its owner in which lodging and breakfast or meals are provided for not more than 6 roomers for compensation on less than a weekly basis. And a boarding house, which is a building occupied by its owner in which not more than 6 roomers, lodgers, and or boarders are housed or fed for compensation on a weekly or longer basis. And a roomer is defined within the zoning code as a lodger or boarder occupying a rented room in a private home or a rooming house. And finally, the last two uses that are permitted within the code that allow for lodging is a hotel and a motel. A hotel is a building or portion thereof containing 6 or more rooms that are rented or hired out to be occupied or which are occupied for sleeping purposes for compensation. And a motel is a building or buildings detached or in connected units or designed as a single structure, the units of which are used as individual sleeping or dwelling units, each having its own private toilet facilities and may or may not have its own kitchen facilities and are designed primarily for the accommodation of transient travelers. I just want to make a quick note that the guest house does not mention compensation, and each of these other uses do mention that within their definition. The complete appellant statement is included in your packet before you, but just real quick, in short, the appellant disagrees with the board's interpretation of a guest house, the definition of a guest house, since receiving compensation for guests that stay in the guest house is not specifically prohibited within the definition. When considering the merits of an appeal, no additional public testimony or information shall be taken or considered by the council. After considering the record and the reasons for the appeal, the council may take one or more of the following actions tonight. They may sustain the decision of the board in whole or in part, reverse the decision of the board in whole or in part, or remand the decision and with additional comments to the board for further instructions. And with that, I'm available for questions.
Okay, Art?
What's the square footage of the living area of the guest house?
The space is 1,000 square feet.
Okay, I think.
John had some.
John, do you have something you want to?
Yeah, could you go back to the definitions of the boarding house? Keep going back. Keep going. Well, now, wait a minute.
Well, there's one.
You had one in there that talked about, yeah, there it is. It appears to me in these definitions that you can go either way as far as compensation.
Okay.
Is that not correct?
With a bed and breakfast or a boarding house, that you could either ask for compensation or not? Is that?
Well, yeah. This is not, what is, you had up there a definition of a boarder or a lodger, or the thing that I'm concerned about is, does it make, since it's not in specifically in the rules that we have as far as the zoning, because it is not in there one way or another, does that prohibit the activity?
Bill, you want to answer
Or
that?
if I might. The city zoning code is an exclusionary zoning code. Therefore, if a use is not specifically named as being permitted, then it's assumed not to be legally permissible. So because of the fact that the guest house does not specifically speak to compensation, the assumption is that the compensation is not allowed in a guest house. Where these other uses, such as a boarding house or a bed and breakfast, specifically authorize the rental of the property or of that space for compensation.
Okay.
Okay. Walter? I'll come back to you, Art.
If I may, to Bill, in the appellant's letter to the council asking to have this appeal, there's a statement made, quote, "The board's primary argument against the application was that it is against city code to receive payment by guests staying in our guest house. This is not prohibited in the city's definition of guest house and is therefore permitted." If I understood John's question and your answer a second ago, that is not a true statement.
If I might, we probably would not share that opinion. The zoning code is an exclusionary code. Therefore, only uses that are named or defined are allowable uses. There are specific uses that relate to lodging for compensation in that district that use the term roomer or lodger or boarder. None of those terms are utilized in the guest house definition, and guest is undefined, so we do have to go to the common definition. And that's really the question that's before the council tonight. Historically, staff has interpreted that a guest house is a not-for-compensation activity, but we don't have a large number of these. This is the first one we've had in 14 years. We've had, I think, 5 over the last 25 years. So it is not a common use that we encounter, but it has been the general belief by staff that because of the use of the term guests, because of no mention of compensation, and because there are other uses that specifically mention and refer to compensation using the term roomers and lodgers, that a guest house is just that, is for guests, friends or family who may be staying, or servants as the definition reads. There was a misunderstanding with Becky as being new in handling the application, that she didn't understand that difference. We do generally concur with the board's interpretation and their decision, but certainly it is the council's code, and the council has the ability to interpret its code.
Thank you.
Art?
Just a question, somewhere in the depths of the codes, is there any provision for how long a guest can be in a guest house?
That's not specifically noted within this definition. There are in the other definitions, you can see that the bed and breakfast says less than a weekly basis. Boarding house is weekly or longer, but within the guest house, that is unclear.
If
So
I
another-
may. In a guest house, I don't think there would be a limit. It says that it could be a servant's quarter. It could be, the older kid living out in the back, living in the guest house. I don't think it's a duration thing.
Other questions for Becky? Thank you, Becky. I would like to hear from the applicant, Nathaniel. Ely, would you like to come up, please?
Thanks for coming out this evening. I appreciate it. So I want to thank.
Just announce your name and your address, sir, please.
Certainly. My name is Nathaniel Ely. I live at 318 South Howard.
Okay.
So, again, thanks for coming out this evening. I appreciate it. I want to first thank the city staff who have been helpful in working through this. And tonight, there's just probably just a few brief things I'd like to bring up. Really, I believe why we're here this evening is because we're talking about whether or not compensation can be received or not. It seems that's the primary objection that we seem to receive. A secondary one was accessibility. And both of these, in my opinion, stem from a lack of knowledge of the code and or interpreting it as exclusionary. I'm actually a building contractor, so I do work with the building department regularly. I do have a working understanding of the code, and today is the first day I've ever heard of it being an exclusionary code. In my understanding is that common law, the general law of the land says that if something's not specifically excluded, it's permitted. And the building codes have, in my experience, always been interpreted that way. This is actually, in my opinion, a flip-flop from Bill. When I met with him last, he was encouraging me to appeal this as well. And so I'm very surprised tonight that he's defining the code in this manner. To address a couple specific questions, Art, you asked about length of stay. The code, the city code does not address it. The IBC code does. It's under the transient living section. It talks about people lodging in transient dwellings, and that's the limit there is 30 days. So it is defined. It's just defined in the IBC. We see a lot of definitions that are in the international code that the city adheres to that cover a guest house and that cover the use that we intend to employ it for. They're just not specified in our city code. The guest house, as you see, has several things. We could use it for guests or servants. So by the way it's written, as absurd as this sounds, we could pass a contract to every guest in which they agree to be our servant and pay us to stay there. So if we want to go by the strict definition, then I think we needed to keep it a little bit more malleable, as it were. So if you have any questions for me, I'd love to answer them.